Hi, I'm Jim O'Connor, and this is the Married Guy's Guide to Life. Today's installment, Courage Takes Many Forms. Every year after the Super Bowl ends, young men across America turn their attention to that next great annual sporting event, Pinewood Derby. Anyone who's had a Cub Scout in the family knows this annual competition in no way pales in comparison to the Super Bowl. The Derby pits boy against boy, and all too often dad against dad, in a competition to not only assemble and decorate a swift and cool-looking car, but also put their creation to the ultimate test, durability. If you're unfamiliar with Pinewood Derby, here's a primer. The Scout receives a small box containing a block of wood, which is pre-cut to accept axles and plastic wheels also included in the box. The rules are simple. Cut and shape the wood any way you want. Paint it any way you want. But, just like in boxing and wrestling, the car can't exceed a very specific weight limit. Then comes race day. The cars are lined up at the top of a track that looks much like a miniature roller coaster. The starting point is 4 or 5 feet off the ground. The cars are held motionless behind a barrier. Once the barrier is lifted, gravity takes over and let the best car win. I know, it sounds really simple, but you wouldn't believe the tension, especially late in the day as the finals loom and the wheels literally begin to fall off. And that's the point where my story begins. It was my final Pinewood Derby as Cub Master of Pack 25. My job that day was to serve as Master of Ceremonies. Part of my charge from the guys in the pits was to come up with something to kill about 10 minutes right before the finals. This would give my fellow adult leaders, Murphy, Steve, Potsy, Al, and their helpers, time to double-check the standings and ensure all the right cars were ready for the finals. I'd been Cub Master for 4 years, so they trusted I'd come up with something appropriate. The only caveat was that I wasn't supposed to do anything too sentimental. As rough and tough as these guys were on the outside, to a man they were nothing but sentimental mush on the inside. And while we all agreed that yes indeed, real men do cry, we didn't cry in public. The track ran almost the full length of the gym. The bleachers were packed. We had a standing room only crowd as I took up my position in front of the track at the half-court line. Like the Scouts and other adult leaders, I was decked out in my Class A dress scout uniform, complete with a special plastic bear claw necklace I'd made just for the occasion. I'd spent days thinking about my assignment. For the best part of a week, I just couldn't make up my mind. Then while dropping off my kids at school, I saw Kevin. Kevin was one of the smallest Scouts in the pack. He was a real cute kid who had one of those great smiles and infectious personalities that drew him to people. Kevin was also very ill. He had a condition that forced him to miss a lot of school and undergo all sorts of painful therapy. But Kevin was a trooper. He always had a smile on his face, and he loved scouting. Whenever he was able to attend a pack meeting, he'd run up full of excitement and ask me what we had planned. He was a great kid and deserved to be recognized. I had a plan. The crowd became quiet. I called Kevin up to stand beside me, and I explained that he was going to help me tell a story. It was an ancient story, passed down over the centuries from Indian chief to Indian chief, and then from Cub Master to Cub Master. The story was about an Indian village tucked away high in the Rocky Mountains. The village had come under attack several times by a neighboring tribe. As an early warning system, signal fires were set up on 5 peaks surrounding the village. If a fire went out, the villagers would see it and have time to evacuate. One day, the chief had a problem. Most of the adult men were gone on a hunting party and wouldn't return for several days. He had enough braves to cover 4 of the peaks, but not the 5th. He had only one option. He called together the 4 oldest boys in the camp and gave them strict instructions. "You'll travel to the 5th peak," he commanded. "Once there, you'll light the signal fire and keep it lit throughout the night, no matter what. Your families are depending on you." The 4 boys promised their chief they'd be brave and that they'd stick together, no matter what. One of the boys was smaller than the rest. As they marched up the trail to the peak, the 3 bigger boys poked fun at him. They told him he'd be the first one to become frightened and run home. They arrived at the peak just before sunset. They built a fire. Soon, darkness overtook their camp. They couldn't see much past the fire. It was like a black curtain had been shut all around them. Then the noises started in the trees nearby. Animal noises. Was it a bear? Was it wolves? They didn't know, but they knew it was close, and it scared them. Then a howl came from the trees. The four boys jumped as one. They screamed. One of the bigger boys began to cry. He grabbed his bag and ran down the trail toward the village. He was going home. The small boy stared at the trail. He wanted to go home more than anything, but he had promised the chief he'd stay, no matter what. The animal noises stopped, but an hour later they were replaced by the wind. It felt like a storm was brewing to the west. The boys put more wood on the fire. It seemed like the wind was trying to do everything it could to douse the flames. The wind grew and grew until the trees began to sway back and forth. Limbs started to drop. Bang! Bang! As they hit the ground. As the last limb crashed to the ground, another boy grabbed his bag and ran for the village. The little boy was left with only one companion. The two boys stared at each other, each wondering if he had the courage to stick it out, each hoping against hope that the wind would die down. It was beginning to thunder in the distance. Then the rain started, not hard, but steady. It's one thing to be scared in the dark, but it's much worse to be scared in the dark, wet, and cold. The boys took turns going into the trees to get more dry wood for the fire. Then it happened. A bolt of lightning struck a tree not 20 yards from the camp. The bigger boy screamed and ran. The little boy was left alone, holding an armload of firewood. The fire was starting to die. The wind was howling. The rain kept coming. The animal noises began again. His upper lip began to quiver. He'd never been so afraid. He'd never felt so alone. Then he remembered why he was there. The chief had given him a job. His village was depending on him. He carried the wood to the fire. He knew what he had to do. Just before daybreak, the chief stood in the middle of the village. He looked from peak to peak, counting the signal fires. He thought he'd heard the boys from peak number 5 come home during the storm, but he counted 5 fires. He smiled with pride. The boys had stayed at their post. At breakfast, the chief began to tell his people how proud he was of the boys who stood up to the task and showed bravery. But as he looked into the faces of his people, he realized 3 of the faces in the camp shouldn't have been there. Instead of being on the mountain, they were in his camp. They were warm and dry. He was sad. At that moment, the 4th boy walked into the camp. He was tired, wet, and cold, but he held his head high. The chief called him to the center of the village. He listened closely as the little boy described the animal noises, and the wind, and the rain, and the terrible lightning. The chief knew he must have been very afraid, but the boy simply said he was more afraid that he would let down the village if the fire went out. He knew keeping the fire going was the most important thing. Then the chief stood next to the boy and said these famous words: "Courage takes many forms. A person's size doesn't matter. What's in your heart is what matters. It takes courage to battle an enemy face to face, but that enemy you can see. You know what's coming. It takes a special kind of courage, the heart of the bear, to face an enemy you can't see." With that, the chief removed the bear claw necklace from his neck and placed it over the head of the little boy. "Today, you've proved you have the heart of the bear. Your village is proud of you." That's when I removed my bear claw necklace. I told the crowd how even though Kevin had to be gone a lot, he attended every pack meeting he could. And more importantly, when he was there, he was enthusiastic and helped other boys with their projects. In short, he was a good scout, and someday would be a great leader. With that, I turned to Kevin, and as I placed the necklace around his neck, I said to him, "Take this bear claw necklace and wear it proudly, for you have earned it, young scout. You have shown your pack and your village that you have the courage to stand and face the enemy you cannot see." I didn't realize until that moment that the gym had gone completely silent. Not a single parent moved. Then Kevin turned to the crowd and hit him with his patented 1,000-watt smile. The place went nuts. It was a standing ovation, all for Kevin, the little boy with the heart of the bear. I turned around and found the pit crew frozen in place, tears streaming down their faces. I'd held it together until then. Now it was my turn to tear up. As I made my way back to the scorer's table, each of the guys shook my hand. Then Murphy spoke for the group as he wiped his eyes, smiled, and said, "That was really great. And by the way, don't ever do that again."